The House of Windsor, a dynasty built on centuries of tradition, whispered secrets, and carefully curated public image. But what happens when the very foundations of that image are threatened, not by foreign invaders or political upheaval, but by the actions of one of its own? The story of Sarah Ferguson, once the exuberant Duchess of York, is a Shakespearean tragedy playing out in the harsh glare of the 21st century media landscape. And just when you thought the final curtain had fallen, a new act begins, one filled with betrayal, exile, and the chilling possibility of revenge. December 2nd. An otherwise unremarkable day in London, except for the carefully worded statement that landed like a bomb on the steps of Buckingham Palace. Sarah Ferguson, it declared, would no longer receive any financial support, security provisions, or housing assistance from the royal family. The severance was immediate, absolute, and delivered with the cold precision of a corporate restructuring. Gone. Just like that, a woman who had once dined with presidents and danced with princes was cast adrift, left to navigate a world that had never been kind to her. But this wasn't just about cutting ties with a troublesome figure. This was about damage control, about protecting the crown from a scandal that threatened to engulf it entirely. To understand the gravity of this decision, you have to understand the forces that have been swirling around the monarchy for years, forces that have finally converged to create the perfect storm. The first, and perhaps most potent, is the long shadow of Jeffrey Epstein. The association with Prince Andrew has been a PR nightmare for the royal family, a stain that refuses to wash away. But the tentacles of that scandal reach further than many realize, extending to Sarah Ferguson through past emails, business dealings, and a general proximity to a world of unimaginable darkness. As American investigators ramp up their inquiries, the palace is desperate to create distance, to ensure that any potential fallout doesn't contaminate the crown itself. Then there's the issue of money, or rather the chronic lack thereof. Sarah Ferguson's financial woes have been a constant source of embarrassment for the royal family. Failed business ventures, mounting debts, and a penchant for questionable partnerships have painted a picture of a woman perpetually on the brink of financial ruin. And while the royal family has quietly bailed her out in the past, King Charles has made it clear that the era of nostalgic allowances is over. The monarchy simply can't afford to keep propping up someone with no official role, no clear purpose, and a seemingly endless capacity for financial misadventure. But perhaps the most insidious motive behind this decision is the shifting landscape of public opinion, particularly in the United States. The American audience, with its deep fascination for the British monarchy, has always been a crucial source of support and goodwill. But recent polling data has revealed a growing unease with the York family, a sense that Sarah Ferguson's continued presence at Royal Lodge is an affront to modern sensibilities. In an age where transparency and accountability are paramount, the monarchy can't afford to be seen as clinging to outdated traditions and tolerating questionable behavior. The seeds of this decision were sown long ago, in quiet conversations behind palace walls, in hushed briefings at Kensington Palace, and in the growing sense that Sarah Ferguson had become a liability the crown could no longer afford to bear. Princess Catherine, in her quiet, observant way, was one of the first to recognize the danger. She noticed the rising maintenance costs at Royal Lodge, the negative sentiment associated with the York household, and the subtle shift in the way palace staff spoke about Sarah Ferguson. It was a slow, almost imperceptible unraveling, but Catherine understood that something significant was brewing. The Queen Consort, Camilla, ever attuned to the shifting winds of public opinion, saw the storm brewing long before it broke. The American press, once a fawning admirer of the monarchy, had begun to ask uncomfortable questions. Why was a non-working royal with a history of financial mishaps still living in a crown estate property? The tone was shifting from gentle ribbing to outright condemnation, a dangerous sign for an institution that relies on international goodwill. Camilla, a shrewd operator who had weathered her own share of public storms, knew that decisive action was needed. A private meeting was convened. Key advisors summoned to the Green Drawing Room, a space steeped in history and shielded from prying ears. The message was clear. The situation with Sarah Ferguson had become untenable. Princess Anne, ever the pragmatist, minced no words. The monarchy was trying to streamline, to modernize, not drag the baggage of the past along for the ride. William, ever mindful of the future, echoed the sentiment. They couldn't continue carrying burdens that didn't belong to the monarchy they were building for future generations. But it was a young communication staffer who articulated the core of the problem. People weren't just watching this as royal drama, they said. They were watching it as a moral question. How much responsibility does a family bear for the actions of someone linked to them? It was a question that resonated deeply, capturing the essence of the dilemma. The palace statement, when it finally arrived, was a masterpiece of carefully crafted ambiguity. It didn't attack Sarah Ferguson, it didn't reference scandals, it simply stated that she would no longer receive royal support. The language was crisp, restrained, deeply institutional. But beneath the veneer of neutrality, the message was clear. The crown was severing ties permanently. For Sarah Ferguson, the news was a devastating blow. Sitting in a London hotel suite, she watched as her phone exploded with notifications, each one a reminder of her expulsion from the royal fold. The loss of Royal Lodge was expected, but the tone of the announcement, the cold formality, the unmistakable message that she was no longer part of the future, cut deep. Across the world, newsrooms buzzed with a mixture of shock and grim recognition. The palace's modernization strategy had always hinted at a leaner monarchy, but nobody expected the shift to be so abrupt, so public, so personal. Sarah Ferguson had become a liability, a symbol of everything the crown was trying to leave behind. But while the world dissected the public fallout, a more personal drama was unfolding behind the scenes. Beatrice and Eugenie, Sarah's daughters, had been preparing for this moment, quietly arranging their mother's escape route. A property in Portugal, far from the prying eyes of the British press, had been readied. This wasn't a vacation, it was a relocation, a survival plan. The sisters moved with a fierce determination, driven by a deep love for their mother and a desperate desire to protect her from further harm. But beneath the practical tasks lay a heartbreaking fear that once Sarah left the UK, the distance between her and the monarchy would become permanent, irreversible. And so, Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, the woman who had once laughed alongside Princess Diana, found herself exiled, cast adrift, left to face an uncertain future. The palace had made its move, severing ties with a figure they deemed too risky, too complicated, too damaging to the crown's carefully cultivated image. But in doing so, had they created something even more dangerous? A loose cannon, a woman with nothing left to lose, and a story the world was waiting to hear. The legal teams were the first to move, poring over ancient documents and modern statutes, searching for loopholes, for precedents, for anything that could mitigate the fallout. The Crown Estate lease for Royal Lodge became ground zero, every clause scrutinized, every comma debated. The goal was clear, to ensure that Sarah Ferguson's departure was legally airtight, that there could be no future claims, no messy disputes, no lingering ties to the royal purse. Prince Andrew, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. The Sandringham Estate, a sprawling expanse of Norfolk countryside, offered a degree of seclusion, a buffer from the relentless media glare, but it was also a gilded cage, a stark reminder of his diminished status. The relocation, framed as routine restructuring, was anything but. It was a symbolic demotion, a clear signal that his days of influence and privilege were over. William and Catherine, from the relative calm of Kensington Palace, observed the unfolding drama with a mixture of empathy and resolve. They understood the human cost of this decision, the pain and uncertainty it inflicted on Sarah and her daughters. But they also recognized the imperative to protect the monarchy, to safeguard its future, even if it meant making difficult, unpopular choices. The practical implications were a logistical nightmare. Security, once a given, now had to be arranged privately, a costly and complex undertaking. Legal counsel was essential, particularly for navigating the treacherous waters of international investigations. And then there was the question of income, the stark reality that Sarah Ferguson, for the first time in decades, would have to fend for herself. The possibilities, both tantalizing and terrifying, swirled around her. Book deals, tell-all interviews, documentary appearances, each offered a potential lifeline, a chance to reclaim her narrative, to settle scores, to finally speak her truth. But each also carried immense risk, the potential to further destabilize the monarchy, to unleash a new wave of scandal and controversy. Beatrice and Eugenie, caught between their loyalty to the crown and their love for their mother, navigated this treacherous landscape with grace and determination. They were daughters first, princesses second, and their priority was clear: to ensure that Sarah had the resources, the support, and the protection she needed to weather this storm. Portugal beckoned, a haven from the media frenzy, a chance to rebuild, to reinvent, to find peace in a quiet corner of the world. but it was also an exile, a separation from everything familiar, a stark reminder of the price of falling from grace. The world watched, waited, speculated. Pundits dissected the palace statement, analyzed the motives, and predicted the future. Social media exploded with opinions ranging from outrage to schadenfreude, from sympathy to condemnation. Sarah Ferguson, once the darling of the tabloids, had become a Rorschach test, a blank canvas onto which everyone projected their own hopes, fears, and prejudices. And what of Sarah herself? In the immediate aftermath of the announcement, she remained silent, cloistered in her London hotel suite, grappling with the enormity of what had transpired. Shock, anger, grief, and perhaps a flicker of defiance all swirled within her, a tempest of emotions threatening to overwhelm. But Sarah Ferguson was a survivor. She had weathered storms before, faced down her critics, and emerged battered but unbowed. And as the initial shock began to subside, a steely resolve began to take hold. She would not be defined by this setback. She would not be silenced. She would find a way to rebuild, to reinvent, to write her own ending to this story. The monarchy had made its move, severing ties with a figure they deemed too dangerous to keep within the fold. But in doing so, they had unleashed a force they could no longer control. Sarah Ferguson, the exiled Duchess, was about to embark on a new chapter, a chapter filled with uncertainty, but also with the tantalizing possibility of redemption, revenge, and perhaps, finally, true independence.